Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to all of you again. So, in the last session we have read about the different regulations which have come into place to facilitate open access, that how the heart and soul of the Electricity Act of 2003 has been translated into action with the help of those regulations. Now, in today's session we will understand that how this open access will be addressing the issue of cross subsidy, because we have learned that open access on the one hand refers to competitiveness, it refers to freedom in procurement of the electricity, it refers to choice to the consumer, and on the other hand the price fixation, the tariff which is to be charged from the customer differs from the cost what respective customers they need to pay. So, cross subsidy, considering the demographic pattern of this country, considering the agrarian economy of this country, appears to be a sort of need, sort of requirement, something which is not to be discounted, something which is not to be dispensed with without really bringing in, without really getting into a sort of getting into concrete thought process that what shall be the effect. So, this is what we would try to understand in this session. Now, if you look at the scheme of the law, if you look at the overall the transformational aspect which has been brought under the Electricity Act 2003, you would find that on the one hand, when it was suggested that let the market be open, then it was also suggested that in order to take the optimal benefit from that open market, the cross subsidy should be reduced progressively. Now, here when you read the term progressive reduction, it certainly brings in the idea that the lawmaker has not thought of leaving the marginalized section of the society in lurch. They have not decided to decide on the supply of electricity based on ability to pay alone. So, that is not what is the driving factor. And why this is so? Because when you look at the obligation which has been entrusted upon the distribution licensee, which we have discussed in detail, that you have an obligation to supply electricity and within a stipulated time, what we call it as an universal service obligation, wherein impliedly it has been stated that not only the supply of electricity shall happen within a stipulated time, but also it should be seen that it is a supply of reliable and quality electricity. Now, with the open access, there is a possibility of the big consumers switching over to the market. And in that regard, it has been suggested that there shall be an imposition of cross subsidy surcharge from the the consumers which were supposed to get the electricity from distribution licensee, but then in their own interest they decided to switch over. So, when you look at the arrangement, you would find that cross subsidy appears to be a necessary evil. It is something which has to be there, for very purpose that electricity is to be supplied to all needy, to all, but at the same time undue burdening should not be there on the large consumers, undue burdening in terms of paying the cost on behalf of others. So, then you would find that this is what is a sort of necessary evil, and that is what even the law talks about it. Now, when you look at the way cross subsidy has been discussed in the Act, you would find that initially it was categorically suggested to eliminate cross subsidy, that there shall be no cross subsidy as the time progresses, and it was suggested that it should be a mandate for the commission to follow. It should be the mandate for all the players to follow. But then we have studied that electricity falls in the concurrent list, and states and the center both, they do have a responsibility to govern the sector, and any reference of elimination of cross subsidy certainly would be bringing heavy cost on political premium, because the large population is not in a position to pay the actual cost of the supply of electricity. And on the other hand, the distribution licensees are being asked to supply electricity under section 43 of the Act. Now, because of the objections raised by the state governments, because of the visible difficulty in eliminating cross subsidy, the amendment was done and this word elimination was dropped. This was removed from the 2003 Act, and therefore, you would find that the sections which deal with cross subsidy, all those sections you would find are now only referring to progressive reduction, that over a period of time it should be reduced. And what shall be the timeline? It is all that when the electricity becomes very competitive and only identified class of consumer needs support from the government for getting the electricity, not the situation which is prevailing as on date, where a large segment, a large class of consumers are looking forward for this support. So, be it the provisions with regard to open access in transmission segment, be it in the distribution related segment, be it the power of the commission to frame regulations, in all this you would find that the reference of elimination was dropped. And one would say that this is something where a kind of reconciliation was done. Reconciliation was done between what ought to be achieved and what is feasible to achieve. Because if you make elimination as part of the legal mandate, then the commissions need to commissions need to move, take the steps in that direction, and therefore that would become a subject matter of legal scrutiny, that is it being done to get eliminated or not. If not, there is a violation of law. So, this very amendment appears to be a reconciliation. Reconciliation because of the need to extend the support to certain class of consumer, and considering that it was decided to continue with cross subsidy and parallelly to build a strategy to reduce it in a gradual manner. Now, when it comes to open access, as we have studied, that when it comes to transmission network, it was decided to roll out immediately, so that multi-buyer model can be given effect without any delay. But then for distribution network, for distribution licensee, it was suggested to roll out in a phased manner, and thus we have read that now with a large consumer having the requirement of more than 1 megawatt is entitled to get open access, but then the large consumer need to pay the cross subsidy surcharge. Now, why this was required to roll out in the phases? Because of the universal service obligation. That is what we need to understand, because it is one set of consumer is paying for the other set of consumer, and that is something which cannot be taken back, which cannot be withdrawn instantly. Otherwise, the electricity would not be available to everyone. Now, when you look at cross subsidy, you would find there are different mechanisms to implement the same. One, for India, you find that the category wise cross subsidy is very popular, where, as I said, a particular set of consumers, they pay for other set of consumers, and as we know in India, it is industrial and commercial consumers, they pay for agricultural consumer, they pay for residential consumer. The other is intra category, where you divide the consumer on the basis of consumption pattern, and the one who has a higher consumption will be paying higher tariff, and a compensatory mechanism is to be devised to extend the support to the consumers which are consumers who are consuming the electricity on a lesser scale. So, this is another category what you find. And the third category is the geographical one, where the consumers staying in hilly areas, tough terrains, rural areas, they need to be supported by the one who is staying in urban areas. So, this is how you find that different methods of implementation of cross subsidy is working, and one for India, it is category which plays a significant role in getting it implemented. Now, we are talking about the removal, we are talking about the withdrawal, we are talking about the elimination of cross subsidy for the betterment of the power market, and no denial that power market will flourish only when you have a situation where every customer, every consumer pays as per the consumption and the cost of supply. That is what is a kind of ideal situation. But then it is also to be taken note of that if you remove cross subsidy without planning, without strategy, then it would really make huge impact on inflation. One certainly is the prices of farm produce will go up, because if the agriculturalists are not getting electricity on a subsidized rate, accordingly they will be increasing the price of farm produce. Second is that if a consumer is been asked to pay the cost as per the actual cost of supply, then it would certainly cause dent in his pocket. Perhaps substantial earning would go in paying electricity bill. And if you can recall, I have discussed this in first few classes, that electricity is not to be seen as a commodity for leading a luxury life. It has become now an important ingredient, important component of leading a meaningful life. So everyone would be going for electricity connection, everyone would be aspiring to get 24/7 electricity connection, and therefore they will have to pay. And if the very payment factor is disturbing the budget, it would certainly have an impact on the inflation. The other important one is political backlash, because a considerable number of the consumer who are getting the benefit of the subsidized rate, they belong to marginalized section. And when you look at the goal of economic development, it is not only about GDP, it is not only about industrialization, it is also about how the upgrading of living style is happening of the marginalized section. And that upgrading, in that upgrading you would agree with me that electricity has a vital role to play. So what would happen to that? And obviously the government would not like to see that marginalized section of the society is further pushed towards periphery. They would not like to see that. And in fact, that should be the concern for everyone. Because if growth is not influencing the life of everyone, if growth is not influencing the life of the last person who is standing in the queue, then there is some question to be raised with regard to the pattern of growth. Some question is to be raised with regard to the policy which is driving that growth. The other is the unpreparedness of DISCOMs, the infrastructural issues, the issue of universal service obligation. That would also make an impact, because cross subsidy is helping the DISCOMs to supply the electricity to all the consumers who are there in the licensee's area of supply. So is the distribution network equipped enough to facilitate open access? That's another important question. Is the relevant data is there to make the prices transparent and competitive? All these issues are also involved with removal. Now in this regard, when you talk about cross subsidy, our attention goes to section 65 of the Act. Now this is a provision wherein state government can extend subsidy. This is different from the subsidy what we have been talking about under cross subsidy, where it is one set of consumer is paying for another set of consumer. Here it is not The consumer who is paying, here the state government is committing to pay, and that is why it is different from cross subsidy, where whatever tariff has been decided by the commission, the government decides on the grant of subsidy on that, whether it should be for person belonging to below poverty line or whether it is for promoting a particular trade. You have been listening, you have been reading this news that the governments are promising free electricity to certain set of consumer, free electricity or subsidized electricity to certain set of industries to promote industry. Now, this kind of announcements by the government gets necessary support from section 65. And somehow when you look at what is being proposed in terms of bringing reform in the sector, you find that it is the direct benefit transfer which is working for other subsidies in India is suggested also for electricity sector, where you observe, where you find that 2020 amendment, proposed amendment suggests that let there be, instead of the cross subsidy going to the distribution licensee and further reaching to the generating companies, it is better that let the actual cost be charged from the consumer and the subsidized rate, subsidized price should be transferred to the account of the beneficiaries. This is what is being proposed. Appears to be a good idea, but then you have to also consider that this is something which amounts to shifting of the whole responsibility. Earlier the responsibility, or what is the system which prevails as on date, the responsibility is of the large consumers. Now, this responsibility you are shifting with this proposed amendment to the taxpayers. How far it is feasible is certainly an important question to investigate. Now, when you look at how the cross subsidy component has worked, when you look at that what are the challenges on which this very legal provision has been discussed or deliberated, you find an important case which is decided by Telangana High Court. Messrs. Keshri Metallurgies Private Limited versus Telangana Electricity Regulatory Commission, the decision of Telangana High Court in the year 2019, wherein what has happened that the petitioner here, Keshri Metallurgies Private Limited, was using the distribution network. Using the distribution network through open access, but then refused to pay cross subsidy surcharge on the very ground that whatever tariff determination has happened, the way the commission has drafted the tariff determination, the cross subsidy surcharge component is missing, and therefore there is no need to pay. That is what was suggested. Now, when the matter has come before the court, and why the High Court? Why matter has come before the High Court? Because of the very fact that legality of the order issued by the Regulatory Commission was challenged. That whether the Regulatory Commission was competent to issue such direction or not, and if directions are being issued, whether it was arbitrary, unlawful, without having any backing of the legal provisions. That is what the High Court can very well examine under 226 of the Constitution. Now, in this case, the High Court very closely examined the rationale of cross subsidy surcharge. The High Court said that why this very scheme of cross subsidy surcharge, why section 42 talks about it.
what is the legal mandate under 42 subsection 2, 42 subsection 4, and it was suggested that the idea is that when the distribution licensee is losing the customer, and the customer which are high paid customers, customers who are paying the higher tariff to support others, then how the distribution licensee is going to maintain the obligation, universal service obligation. So, the rationale of the law is very clear, that if the distribution licensee loses the consumer, where the consumer decides to avail open access, then the consumer is under an obligation to pay cross subsidy surcharge. And in this regard, it has been suggested that when the open access consumer is asking for facilities of distribution licensees, then that consumer has to pay cross subsidy surcharge. If the facilities are being availed and if cross subsidy surcharge is not being paid, then in that case that customer is getting unduly enriched, because he is not paying the charges to the distribution licensees because he is no more a consumer, and at the same time he is getting also the benefit of being an open access consumer. So, the court says that this is not what the law intends, that there shall be undue enrichment to the one set of consumer, and on this premise it was said that the consumer is under an obligation to pay cross subsidy surcharge. Now, this is another interesting case of tribunal which was decided in 2021. This case has arisen because of the relief which the State Regulatory Commission in the state of Jharkhand decided to extend to the industry. Industries approached the government that we need to get the necessary support because the electricity is not being sold because of shutdown, because of lockdown during COVID-19, and therefore revenue flow has stopped. The power plant is not operating as per the capacity, and thus some relief should be given. Jharkhand government suggested Regulatory Commission to come up with the plan, and Regulatory Commission, on the basis of the petitions submitted by the consumers to the government, suggested under section 108 that let there be waiver of the fixed charges for 3 months. Now, the appellant here, who was a distribution licensee, argued that the waiver is contrary to the tariff regulation determined by the commission. The licensee said that there is nothing called waiving of fixed charges. There can be preponement or postponement, but waiving is beyond the competence, because that is what is to be paid by the consumer, by the licensee to the distribution licensees, and in this case waiver was decided. So, the appellant argued that if the government wants to extend the support to the consumers, government can always invoke section 65 and grant the subsidy And section 65 says that the payment of subsidy should be in advance to the licensee. It does not say that it has to be paid later on, it says it has to be paid in advance. So, appellant said that let that arrangement be there and let the government bear the cost, there is no problem. But if the commission passes an order under section 108 of the Act, which authorizes the commission to pass an order in public interest, then that order must be in compliance with the tariff regulation. It cannot be different from that, and therefore, in this case, when the tribunal said that what is to be done is the balancing of interest. You cannot only take care of the interest of the consumer, you have to also take care of the interest of the licensees. And this blanket waiver for 3 months, and that too with a retrospective effect, was a harsh one. And in this case, it was so happened that appellant submitted this information to the tribunal that considerable number of consumers have already paid the fixed charges. Now, on the basis of this notification, on the basis of this invocation of section 108, now they will be also asking back the money, they will be asking for returning back that amount, and that would really be very harsh on the distribution licenses. Considering this, the court, the tribunal has said that it was wrong on the part of the commission to issue this direction under section 108, because the tariff formulation was being done, fixed charges are to be paid as per the tariff formulation, as per the fixation done by the regulatory commission, and if at all section 65 could have been used by the state government for extending the support to the consumers. So, that is what is important to understand the open access cross subsidy debate. Thank you for this session. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.